Welcome to our third Red Sneaker Writers podcast, a podcast with news, interviews, and writing tips for people who are serious about having a writing career and want some practical knowledge to help them achieve it. Your host is the nationally best-selling author of more than 50 books, William Bernhardt.
Hello, Red Sneaker Writers. Thank you for joining us again for this podcast. I'm here with my sound expert, Jesse Ulrich. Jesse, how you doing?
I'm doing well.
Thank you again for all your help with that last episode. I thought John Lesquia was fantastic, had so much to say. Do you remember what I promised him we would do on the next podcast?
Yes, that we would talk about his album, his musical album that he was coming out with.
Right. Except I went to his website and then emailed him. It's not out yet. So don't judge me for not mentioning it. It's not quite out yet, but as soon as it is, I promise I'll bring it up.
I had that in my notes as well. It's like I need to check to see if the album's out. So
good man. That's your second job, to remember everything I forget. On this podcast, our very special interview guest is New York Times bestselling, and just to point out, that's our third multiple New York Times bestselling author in a row. This week, it is the brilliant William Martin, who is the author of many historical thrillers that have repeatedly topped the charts and gotten rave reviews, starting with Cape Cod, The Lincoln Letter, most recently Bound for Glory, many of them with the series character Peter Fallon. He is an extraordinary writer and extraordinary talent. The accolades go beyond mere writing. In 2015, the U.S. Constitution Museum gave him the Samuel Eliot Morrison Award for, get this, quote, patriotic pride, artful scholarship, and an eclectic interest in the sea and things maritime. Just a few years ago, the Mystery Writers of America New England chapter gave him the Robert B. Parker Award, which is pretty darn good company, I would say. So stay tuned. He has a lot to offer to writers and aspiring writers. But first, the news. First news story.
Sorry, it took me a second.
That's all right. First news story today. Just let me say up front, to be perfect, I never expected I would be doing on this podcast a news story that relates to TikTok. I barely even know what TikTok is, except I thought it was a place where young people posted short videos, mostly dancing. And I remember President Trump saying that he was going to ban it, except I guess that didn't happen. And suddenly now here it is, and it's become important, seriously important in the book world. Jesse, can you explain to me what is TikTok?
So, okay. Since the front-facing camera showed up on cell phones, there have been multiple social media services that have tried to find the right sort of short video platform for sharing videos. There was Vine a long time ago that Twitter bought and then killed. There's been there was Snapchat before TikTok, and now there's TikTok, which is more, each of them have a thing, right? And TikTok's is like adding music to it, right? Adding like a music library to it. So there's a lot of people you doing like sort of video karaoke and whatnot. And I don't fully understand it either. It's a little bit, it's for people younger than me,
right? But
it does seem to be a very good way of, every time I'm reading about how to market your podcast better, I keep reading about how I should be on TikTok, and I'm like, but I don't understand it.
Well, I guess I'm going to have to get serious about it, because apparently now there's also hashtag book talk, which resides within the TikTok universe, and it is doing serious business recommending books. According to that New York Times article that Jesse's put up on the screen, these videos are mostly made by females, young women, people in their teens or early 20s, who have come to dominate this hashtag book talk. And they recommend books often in a very emotional way. The Times article talks about them crying openly about the emotional ending. Well, okay, you may be thinking that's just for kids or something, but it's not. Barnes & Noble CEO James Daunt has also launched his own TikTok channel. Why? Well, he's gonna promote books, and don't accuse me of being sexist here. I'm quoting right from the press release. He says he will champion books in the popular style of young women who recommend and sometimes disrecommend books. Here's a quote from Shannon DeVito, who is the director of books at Barnes & Noble. She says, "These creators are unafraid to be open and emotional about the books that made them cry and sob or scream or become so angry they throw it across the room, and it becomes this very emotional 45-second video that people immediately connect with. We haven't seen these types of crazy sales, I mean tens of thousands of copies a month, with other social media formats." I mean, historically, we thought that Facebook was the best social media for promoting books, but maybe that's about to change. That's part of why James Daunt has started his own TikTok channel. He says that in the stores, they've already set up displays, like in the brick and mortar stores, of book talk titles, and it drives sales more than any other social media format. Tens of thousands of copies a month. Well, I wanted to cover this because I know many of you Red Sneaker writers are on social media, and probably the last thing you want to hear about is one more social media platform that you need to start covering regularly. But it sounds like this is already something major and about to become even more major. So you need to know about it. For that matter, in the past week, Facebook announced that it's starting its own book publishing platform, taking on Amazon's KDP, except I guess here, instead of being aligned with the nation's largest bookseller, you'd be aligned with the nation's largest social media outlet and way of promoting books. For that matter, publishers are beginning to test Clubhouse. I did my first Clubhouse interview yesterday. That's a phone app. It's all audio, but people talk about many things, including how to promote books. And just today, BookBub, which of course is great for promoting ebooks, and they have Chirp, which promotes audiobooks. Now they've started BookBird, which is going to use carrier pigeons to deliver books to people all around the world. Okay, you got that was an April Fool's joke, right? For those of you who are listening to this live. Oh, that's why you're here, Jesse, for stuff like that. Yes, if you're watching this live, it's April Fool's Day. Everybody else may have no idea what's going on. So TikTok, maybe time to download it. Okay, second news story. Still on the web, though. This has to do with Book Club, bookclub.com. I mentioned this on a previous podcast when it was just starting up, but now they're an actual startup with a website. They've raised $6 million on this platform, which is planning to produce book club discussions with authors for book clubs, except primarily doing it online with Zoom or whatever. Basically, they want to take the Oprah's book club model and move it online. And they're already contracting with individual local book clubs to create various themes and genres and interests. They also have a place you can see on that screen Jesse put up where it says for authors. You authors click on that. I did it because I always test things before I talk about them, and it takes your information and names and titles. I'm not sure where it goes from there. I think they sort of put you in a data bank. So if one of the book clubs is looking for you or looking for someone who does the kind of thing they do, then you can be contacted. Well, you know, if you can get your book discussed in a book club setting, that's not a bad thing. Word of mouth is still what primarily drives book sales, and even a small club can get the powder keg ignited or get the ball rolling, and one thing leads to another, and that's how great writing careers are built. So you might want to check out Book Club. Article 3, and this time we're going to a different website. We're talking about Etsy. What? Etsy, where people are selling their macrame and what? Yes, but apparently people are also selling their fan fiction, which is why I included this story, because I know some of you are writing fan fiction, which is fun, can be popular in a no-charge, absolutely free way. A lot of people posting it to Wattpad and whatnot. The problem is, of course, fan fiction is dealing with licensed characters. Harry Potter and people in the Marvel universe and that sort of thing. So you can write it and post it if you don't charge for it in most cases, but you cannot sell it. But what people are doing, according to the article you see up on the screen in The Verge, is sort of making fancy, elegant, bound copies of their fan fiction and selling it on Etsy, not theoretically selling the content, but selling this lovely thing, this book, this binding and cover that they've created. Well, this seems like a pretty thin line to me, not putting on the legal hat, but that I'm not going to be recommending this, even for people who like or read fan fiction. I don't know. Jesse, do you read fan fiction?
I don't, and I have a question about how this works. Like, is it just the binding, and the person who receives the binding puts the pages in it, or is it coming with the pages?
No, I think it's coming with the pages. I think the story is in there, but they're
Okay.
not theoretically charging for the story because they can't, because they don't own the characters. I mean, as you know, since I found out before the podcast that we're both Star Trek geeks, I'll just mention that that may be where fan fiction began, although some would argue that you could take it all the way back to Jane Austen. But for popular culture, Star Trek fan fiction is perhaps what really got the ball. There have been, I don't know, thousands of stories and novels, but you can't sell them for profit unless you've got the Paramount Pictures imprimatur, their permission to do it. This is a way people are trying to get around that, but I'm not recommending it. I think they're standing on pretty shaky legal ground because it sure looks a lot like they're selling a book involving somebody else's character. Okay, article number 4. This one involves Amazon and a new lawsuit that has been filed. This has probably been the biggest story of the week, but I'm putting it forth because I'm not sure how much I think it's going to amount to. These companies have been sued before, and not much changes. But in this case, it's actually a bookseller who has gotten a law firm to sue Amazon and publishing companies, the big 5, basically, which are about to be big 4, as you know, if you've followed the podcast, accusing them of price fixing and attempting to, quote, intentionally constrain the book selling market and inflate the wholesale prices of print books. This was started by an Illinois bookstore called Bookends and Beginnings. But of course, they're hoping it'll be much bigger than that. In fact, that screen that you're seeing that Jesse put up is from the law firm's website, where they're encouraging other booksellers to join with them. What they're hoping is that this will become a class action suit. They filed it as such, but again, without getting all legal on you, but back in my lawyer days, I dealt with class action suits as a defendant, and I know it's a difficult and expensive process. First, it's got to be certified by the court, and then you've got to notify people and try and get other plaintiffs to join with you. It takes a long time. Amazon was sued by somebody else earlier this year for similar grounds. You may remember as far as 10 years ago when Apple was sued for much the same, back when they were the leading sellers of ebooks, for conspiring to fix prices with the big 5 publishers, except then I think it was big 6. And that ended up leading to about a $400 million settlement. In a way, this is ironic because you'll remember at one time, Amazon had the right to alter anybody's price to discount it, and the big 5 objected, and they negotiated, and eventually the big 5 won the right to set their own prices, which is why big 5 ebooks are so much more expensive than anybody else's now. Is that price fixing? I don't know. But I'm letting you know that this is going on because at some point, at least, it might affect writers like you and me. One last story. This comes from Stephen King. It was announced this past week that he has made his house in Maine, has gotten approved to make his house in Maine a writer's retreat. The city approved it. They're going to rezone their Victorian property, which sits on over 3 acres, into a writer's retreat that they hope they can start taking applications for soon. As you can see, it's very much what you would expect it to be. It's spooky and ooky and has bats and gargoyles. And I don't know. As you know, some of you know, I have writer retreats every summer in Eureka Springs because I think it's the most beautiful place in the world. and so inspirational. Where better to write? But this place, I think I would always. Of course, I don't write horror, but even if I did, I think I would always be looking over my shoulder. Not the kind of tranquil writer's retreat I would want, but somebody else might. So now you know about it. Watch for the formal announcement when this opens. All right, let's move to the interview with William William Martin, best-selling author of many extraordinary books, starting with Cape Cod. All the books you see up there, the most recent one is Bound for Gold. He is an extraordinary talent and true artist in our field. Is he there, Jesse? Can we bring Bill into this podcast?
We can.
Hey, Bill, how you doing?
I'm just doing fine, Bill. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much
Good.
for joining this podcast.
Glad to be here.
Okay, first question, because you've already answered my usual first question, so I had to come up with a new first question for you. So I know you know a lot of words, but now I'm just going to ask for one word. So let's say you're talking to an aspiring writer, and they want what is the word that I should be keeping in my head, or what should be the mantra that I chant to myself every morning as I'm trying to succeed as a writer? What's that word going to be?
Right.
And you mean with a W, right?
Right. Persist. Don't take no for an answer. That's the whole idea.
Perseverance.
Right. As Louis L'Amour once said, one of the many famous writers that I occasionally quote, you just have to write. Don't sit and think. Don't anticipate. Don't wonder. The water doesn't flow unless the faucet is turned on, and the only way to do that is to sit down every day and try to fill pages or try to fill time. And it's amazing how quickly you will be able to generate enough pages, enough words to say, well, it may not be good, but it's got the shape of a novel. It has the length of a novel. Maybe we can work it into a novel now that I have all of this raw material, which is basically what the first draft is. And
much easier to revise words than to create something from scratch, right?
Right.
So do you have sort of a routine? I know you write on a regular basis. How do you approach the day?
Well, I come up here every day. This is my office you're sitting in. I come up here every day, and as I have been for now about 40 years, and sit down, and as the famous New York sports writer Red Smith said, I sit down and open a vein. It's easy. And I write from or sit here. Some writers have page counts, like Robert Parker. Parker used to write 5 pages a day on his Spencer book, and then he got so adept at it that he would write 5 pages a day in the afternoon on something else. Stephen King has a word count. For me, it's just the time, because I'd drive myself crazy if I had a 5-page count every day, and I knew by the end of the week, when I should have had 25 pages, that I only had 10, I wouldn't be able to sleep at night. So I put in 8 hours a day, and that for me keeps everything working, and I always get something done, even if it's not a lot. And in part, that's because this never gets easier. As you know, you may get better at it, but the same amount of effort and thought and beating of a head against the wall that I did when I wrote that one back there, Back Bay, my first book.
Back Bay first.
Yeah. I put in the same amount of effort now, I might not be quite as fearful and driven, worrying that the wolf is at the door, and what have I
Mhm.
done here by deciding to be a novelist or a screenwriter, which was the original intent.
Mhm.
Um, but still, it's the same level of effort every time with every book. And everybody who listens to a podcast like this and sits down and says, "Man, this is really hard.
Mm.
How do I keep doing this?" The only way to do it is just to keep filling pages and then looking back and editing every 5 days or whatever you decide to do.
I think it's important for people to hear that from someone of your stature, because I know I work with people who think writing is so hard. It must just be me. I must just
Yeah.
not be very good. But
Hmm.
no, it's just that writing is hard, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And if it was easy, everybody would do it. And
That's true.
you know,
But give them some hope. You said it never gets easy, but surely it's gotten a little easier, a
well,
little bit.
I I think I understand the questions to ask myself now. I mean,
Hmm.
so much of because we first met teaching writing out at the tough
In
work.
Hawaii.
Somebody has to do it at the Hawaii
Yeah,
Writers Conferences.
right.
Um, and you know what I always believed teaching out there is that what I'm trying to help anybody to do who wants to be a writer is to figure out the right questions to ask
Hmm.
about the work that they're engaged in, because it is such a solitary profession. It is such a focused and inward looking profession where we spend the whole day alone in a space which this is Philip Roth once said is as silent as the bottom of a swimming pool. Although I have music going sometimes here. Um, what we need to be doing constantly is hearing a voice in our own head and not the characters of a critical voice in our own head that is telling us uh, are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure you
Hmm.
want to take the characters down that road? Because if you go down that road, you'll run into an awful lot of trouble with them, and you'll cut half of it out later on. Okay, go ahead, try, see what happens. Good luck. You know, uh,
I'm
eh,
impressed that you can listen to music while you're
yeah,
writing. I couldn't.
yeah,
I would start listening to the music and
yeah.
forget what I was supposed to be doing. Do you
Well,
have a favorite kind of music? Or
what often happens is that I listen to music that is somehow connected with the period that I might be writing in. Um, when I wrote the Lincoln Letter about the Civil War, I listened to,
great book.
thank you. I listened to a lot of Civil War related material. I would listen to the soundtrack to Ken Burns's Civil War.
Mm,
Uh, there was a group of guys um, who used to go around. I think they're the 54th Regiment String Band or some kind of a name like that, and they do uh, great arrangements of music that was entirely endemic to the Civil War era. And now my new book, which is called December 41, I'm
mhm.
in heaven. I'm in heaven because I I might have been of the the Rolling Stones generation, but my friends always used to tell me I was born 30 years too late because my musical tastes were all related to the big bands and the vocalists of the 40s. So I've been able to listen to a lot of that kind of music. And
Now, that
do
book
you
comes
know?
out later, right?
Yeah, that book will be out December 41, which actually begins on December 8th, 1941, and ends on Christmas Eve. Uh,
So right after Pearl Harbor.
right. It uh, One of the great little tidbits, since we're talking about the music now, one of the great little tidbits I got out of it was that uh, the number one song on December 7th It went to the top of the Billboard charts on December 7th, 1941. Was Glenn Miller and the orchestra playing Chattanooga Choo Choo.
Did you work that into the book?
Damn right I did. Twice. Yeah.
Okay, before we go any further, I need to clear something up because I think I said Cape Cod was your first book earlier, but I'm swapping two bodies of water, aren't I? Back Bay came first, right?
Yes, yes.
And did that introduce the Peter Fallon?
Yes.
Right. So that was the first.
That book came out in 1980, and Cape Cod, which is back there, came out actually 30 years ago this month.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's never been out of print, and people still read it, and it just went to an audiobook last year. It hadn't been in an unabridged audio before
Really?
that. And if you want to know the story of the writer's life,
Mm-hmm.
I can think of there are a million stories that relate to Cape Cod, but the one that would resonate with what we've just been saying about the first draft and about just writing and getting the material onto the page, I delivered a manuscript. Since I envisioned that book as a kind of Michener version of the story of Cape Cod, and it begins with a whale stranding in 1000 AD and ends in the present, I delivered a manuscript that was close to 1,200 pages long. And and my editor at Warner Books at the time, her name was Jamie Rabb. She later became the publisher, and she now has an imprint called Celadon Books. She said to me, "We love it. Cut 25% of it, and we'll print it." Now I had spent 4 years working on that book. So if you cut 25% of it, it basically was like just cutting a year of my life away and throwing it away.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So that, for your listeners, is the kind of story that should emphasize to them how committed you have to be, not only to getting it onto the page, but also then to figuring out what you need to cut.
Mm-hmm.
and reducing what you have down to a more manageable experience for a reader.
Right. My books get shorter with each draft too, but not that dramatically shorter. But I assume that's a good thing because it gets tighter and quicker, faster paced.
Oh yeah,
better.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if one could call a 750-page novel faster paced,
faster at any rate. That's true. Was there any thought that maybe I can just cut the last fourth and turn that into the start of the sequel or something like that?
No. I tried to do that with the next book that I wrote, which was even longer. That was called Annapolis, about the history of the Navy. And I was at that point in my career where I was kind of positioning myself as a kind of Michener-like writer. Even though I think I always tried to have more of a plot line going through my books than you will see in a Michener chronicle like Chesapeake, and that plot line, that through line would hold every era of time to the next one. So with Annapolis, I thought at the end of the Civil War segment that maybe I could cut it right there and pick up with the second volume, like Herman Wouk. I mean, if Herman Wouk can do it, so can I.
Right. More war.
Right. And the publisher said, no, what you do is you put it all into one volume for us. That's what we want you to do with this one. Therefore, World War II in that novel, Annapolis, ends with the Battle of Midway. There really isn't anything else. And that's
Mm.
1940. That's 1942.
Yeah. It's clear that you were committed to writing, really wanted to write, maybe not novels at first, but have always had a passionate interest in writing. Where'd that come from?
Well, when I was a kid,
Mhm.
I was an only child, and I had no problem at all enjoying my own company, sitting down and reading a book or going up into the attic and
Right.
uh, and sitting there and drawing pictures of battle scenes that I had read about, and so forth, of basically entertaining myself. And here I am all these years later,
Right.
and this is the attic. I'm sitting up in the attic again doing the same sort of thing. But I wanted to direct movies,
Hmm.
and so after college and a couple of years of construction in order to get the money, uh, I went to the USC Film School out in California, and I quickly decided that the best way into the movie business, if you didn't have an uncle in the business, and I didn't, was to write a good screenplay, something that you could hold up and say, "Here, read this, see what you think, give me a job." And modeling myself after a lot of people who had just gone through the USC Film School, like George Lucas and John Milius and people like that,
I've heard
I
of them.
started I I started writing screenplays,
Right.
and nobody wanted to produce the screenplays, even because I was writing historical stuff at that
Hmm.
moment in time when most people were looking to make the next Easy Rider or movies like that. So I um, uh, I remember sitting down with a producer who said to me after I had pitched her some idea, the way you write. And when they say it to you like that, get ready because you're on the way out the door. The way you write, you ought to write a novel.
Mm.
And I had the idea of a Back Bay kicking around in my head, buried treasure beneath the streets of Boston, lost in the landfill, the city's built out over the landfill. And I had that idea in my head as a kind of boyhood fantasy since we had first heard the geographical story of the history of Boston when I was in
Hmm.
the fourth grade. That may sound apocryphal, but it's true.
Hmm.
And um, and so being well supplied with what I called the arrogance of naivete, something that every writer, every potential artist needs to have. The the willingness to say to those people who are going to uh, tell you how hard it is, which we've already told you,
Right.
the willingness to say, well, yeah, but I'm the one who will beat the odds.
Hmm.
I'm the one for whom the difficulties, I will overcome those difficulties. Kind of like um, Han Solo in Star Wars. Don't tell me the odds.
And you did beat the odds. Okay,
Yeah.
would this be a good time to, and I'm hoping in advance that you'll forgive me for this, would this, would this be a good time to mention Humanoids of the Deep?
Yes. Go right ahead.
Good answer, because I've seen
you
it.
you
Go ahead.
have.
Oh
Wow.
yeah.
I apologize.
You no, it's a
Yeah,
wonderful for what it is.
for
How
what
did
it
that
is.
cut? This you
It,
wrote the script, right?
it's a cult classic. Yeah. Hu-
Exactly.
Humanoids from the deep.
From the
Uh,
deep. Okay.
right. Um, when you're in Hollywood, you're trying to get work. You try to make as many friends as you can among the in the world of uh, film producing. And I was fortunate at USC to be in to have a professor who had who was also a playwright and a screenwriter who had written movies for Roger Corman, like some of them are pretty famous. Death Race 2000 with
Right.
Keith Carradine,
Seen that one too.
Bloody Mama with Shelley Winters playing Ma Barker. Corman would make movies based upon whatever trend he was seeing. Bonnie and Clyde was a huge hit, so he'd make one about Ma Barker. And that movie, by the way, has a young Robert De Niro, a young Bruce Dern, a bunch of other characters that you would. And it was directed by Scorsese. Well, anyway, his story editor. I was introduced to his story editor by this professor, a guy named Robert Tom, and she promised to give me a job writing a screenplay. And I had written the first draft of Back Bay. We had moved back to Boston. I had written it back here for the princely sum of $7,500. That was my advance on Back Bay. And I had just finished it when she called me up and said, "We have an assignment for you." And the assignment was Humanoids from the Deep. And all they gave me was the title and the tagline. And the tagline was, "They're not human, but they hunt human women. Not for killing, for mating." And if you've seen the movie, you know how that all unfolds in the movie. But from that came the experience of working in Roger Corman's College of B-movie knowledge, and I learned a lot about storytelling. The other thing that I learned, I'm much happier doing this.
Right. But as long as it's a learning experience.
Right. And even that movie, by the way, which came out in the summer of 1980, was, according to one chart that I've read, was the third most financially successful movie of that summer. I can't remember what number 2 was, but number 1 was The Empire Strikes Back. So I was in pretty good company then as well. However, Roger Corman's business model was to find young talent. I just mentioned Scorsese.
And he did. Yeah.
Everybody started with Roger Corman, and pay them very little and give them no profit participation, and let them learn how to make movies along the way. So
he found you as well.
I know.
All right. I think it's time to turn to some of the questions people have been sending in through the chat box. But before we do that, Jesse, I have one that somebody emailed me this afternoon, and I promised I'd ask. She wants to know, Bill, have you ever been tempted to use any of your personal history or family history in any of your books?
Not too much, although, the Martins, my father and his brothers were great storytellers who loved to talk about their days growing up in the what's known as the South End of Boston, not South Boston. That's a different section. The South End, which was in the 20s and 30s and 40s, a pretty tough neighborhood. Now it's all completely gentrified and is a very expensive place to live. But their stories to me of running the floating crap games and dealing with the bootleggers and doing all of that stuff all made it into one of my novels, which is set in that area in 1916, called The Rising of the Moon. So yeah, I took some family history and stories there, but by and large, I travel so far and wide in my storytelling life that I don't really draw too much on background like that. I will tell you this though, and I just realized this in thinking about this myself recently. Most of the time, the main character in like Peter Fallon or the main character in my new book is from Boston.
Yeah.
He might be the main character in my new book is we first meet him in Los Angeles. He's working at Warner Brothers, but he began in Boston, and You know, I won't tell you
Mhm.
too much about the plot. I don't want to give too much of it away, but
Sure.
the story is a World War II manhunt thriller, and uh, this character is from Boston and has some of the similar aspects of my background. So
Mhm.
it
So
just
maybe,
naturally works its way in. You
of
know?
course, you use
Yeah.
what you know.
Yeah.
All right, Jesse, what else have
You
we
wrote
got?
about lawyers, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the first one was from Oklahoma.
Although,
So,
can I before we go on, let me just say
sure.
one thing about the writing what you know part. I've always believed that even though I turn to characters that are somewhat similar to myself in background, um, I've always believed that you don't write what you know. You
Mhm.
write what you want to find out, or where you want to go, or who you want to meet when you get there. You
Mm,
know, and
sure.
that's kind of been the thing that's driven me along and allowed me, even though this is a fairly constrained little space up here, to have traveled to a lot of different places in my imagination in the course of writing all of these books.
Of
So
course. Terrific.
yeah, yeah.
All right, let's have another one of those questions, Jesse. Well, if you're not getting inspiration from your family history, where's the strangest place you got inspiration for a novel?
um, well, it isn't so much the place as the inspiration itself. The place is just a short distance from here. I was driving along with my wife. I was in a car, obviously. I was driving, and this is right after I had finished Back Bay, and I didn't know what I would do next.
Hmm.
And nobody knew that the book would do as well as it turned out to do, because if we had, my agent might have said, you know, you really ought to do one just like that again. You ought to follow up Back Bay with something quite similar to it. No, they didn't tell me that. I had finished Back Bay, I had finished Humanoids, and I pull up behind a car and I look at the bumper sticker, and the bumper sticker said, "Bequeath thy kidneys." It was promoting organ transplantation. And I said, what would happen if a character gets an organ transplant, becomes fascinated by the donor who has given him life,
Hmm.
and goes to thank the family and becomes involved in the whole experience of the family, and the plot that killed the person who was the donor, and at the end of the story the main character finds himself in the same situation that the donor was in at the beginning of the story. And that whole inspiration came from a bumper sticker. Boom,
Wow.
right there. And that became a book called Nerve Endings, which came out, which was the second book that I wrote. It was a thriller.
Hmm.
I didn't want to write another historical novel right away. I wanted to write something completely different, but still mainstream type fiction.
Hmm.
That's what we write. Um, and and yet something with an interesting character hook. Every book has a different inspiration, a
Right.
different idea that will drive us uh, to say, this is what I want to do. You know, Back Bay, as I say, came from a fourth grade geography class. My third novel, which is called The Rising of the Moon, that's the one that's about Boston and Ireland in the weeks before the Easter Rebellion. Uh, I was just befuddled. I didn't know what I'd write next. And I started playing with good opening lines. You know, Joseph Heller, after he wrote Catch 22, uh, didn't know what he was going to do next. And so he just wrote the word "something happened." And
And
that
that's where
became
that book
his
came
next
from, huh?
novel. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was the first line of the novel. I
Hmm.
have to say I've never read that one. My father-in-law read it long ago, and I asked him, "Well, how was it?" He said, "Oh, nothing happened." Uh,
Hard to follow an act like Catch 22.
right, right. But I
Right.
started writing down good opening lines, and I wrote one called "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned," which
Hmm.
is the opening line of confession,
Right.
and that just out of that, a scene blossomed, and then a story came from that. So it's different every time.
Don't you think part of the reason that works, though, is because you do work regularly? You write every day or close to it, so your subconscious is always kind of looking for material. You're always in writer mode.
That's true. Yeah, writers never rest.
Right.
I will try to turn my brain off at the end of the day, and try not to think about it or stress too much about it. I've given up stressing about it.
Good. All right, Jesse, let's
Well,
have another question. How much time do you spend in research?
well, it usually turns out to be about a year. It takes me about
Just
three.
for the research? Really?
Well, it takes me about 3 years to write a book, uh, to bring a book out. I like um, the historian Nathaniel Philbrick talks about a year for research, a year for writing, and a year for selling, and that's a pretty good barometer of how much time it may take me, or a little bit longer. And it isn't that I'm sitting there every single day researching like a PhD candidate, going to libraries, which I really don't do much anymore, simply because we have this. This
Right.
this has the you know almost everything you need to know you can find right here. Um, but
Uh-oh, we lost him somewhere.
We did.
Do you think that was an internet cutout?
Yes, or possibly. Nope, he's back.
Okay,
We'll find
great.
out what happened.
I'm
Hello.
here. Okay, you
Yeah,
got
you're
me.
back.
Okay, good. Sorry. Um,
You gave us a heart attack there.
yeah, that's the second time we've had connection issues. Now the signal is a little bit weak today. So you'll initially do once you get an idea, you'll start reading the broadest outlines and the grandest texts that you can find about the particular subject matter. The Harvard Yard, for example, a book that I wrote that came out in '03. It's a chronicle novel about the history of Harvard, in which we follow the uh, Harvard from a one-room schoolhouse, the Puritan seminary on the Charles, to the vast, wealthy, complex institution that it is today, and use that as a parallel to follow American history from its time as a Puritan theocracy to what it is today. And
Mhm.
uh, so the first thing you're going to read is Three Centuries of Harvard by Samuel Eliot Morison. Uh, which is the kind of the grandest example of Harvard history. But later on, you're going to be reading very specific things about courses and how they were born, and other uh, minutia that you can build into the book so that it feels as if it's real.
Mhm.
You need to have good detailing throughout any historical novel.
Right.
You need to know in the history, say, of the Navy, uh, what the battles were all about, but you also need to understand what the diet of the soldier of the sailors was who were fighting those battles in the 18th century and beyond. And all of that stuff
Mhm.
feeds into research. Plus, walking the ground, doing as much outdoor research as you can.
I think it's that detail as much as anything that makes your books really shine. Jesse, do we have any more questions?
Oh, I think the first question you asked got resubmitted.
Okay. Well,
Was,
I've got
was,
an
was it from Karen?
yes.
Okay, then yes.
I've
No, there's a couple of just like people thanking you for mentioning that writing is hard. Like it's good to get that affirmation from, from published serious authors that this is not easy and not everyone
mhm.
can do it.
That's fine. I've got one more question and then we'll wrap it up. Bill, what do you think lies in the future of publishing? I mean, we've seen pretty tumultuous changes in the past
Yeah.
10 or
Hmm.
12 years. Where do you think we're going?
Uh, well, it appears as if uh, despite the antitrust suits you were talking about and so
Right.
forth, it appears we're heading toward the vision that Amazon has tried to bring forward, which is that, well, as they said, they wanted to democratize publishing and eliminate all of the so-called gatekeepers. What they really meant was, we just want to make it easy for us to put as much out there as possible.
Right.
Because we need editors. We need people who are professionals in the business of analyzing a story and telling you honestly, and telling you as people whom you will respect, you need to cut 25% out of this,
Right.
because if you don't, nobody's going to read it. You know,
everybody benefits.
We need all of that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, you were doing a little bit earlier a countdown of how the major publishers keep consolidating and
Right.
keep becoming fewer and fewer. And what ultimately will happen is that while lots more people will be able to get a book out, tell a story, take the time at some point in their lives to write something that gets published, I think it'll get harder and harder for people to have lifelong careers as novelists, surely, and usually authors of nonfiction will also be professors and journalists and so forth. But it's going to be very difficult, I think, to sustain a 40-year career.
Right.
Or as in your case, you're a little bit younger than I am. You know,
30 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So you started a long time ago too. And to be able to say, yeah, we never had to have a real job once we started doing that.
That's winning.
Yeah.
That's terrific. Yeah. Bill, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you. It's always nice to talk to you and to all your friends out there. Take care.
A few parting words before we sign off. I'm going to start teaching doing a series of talks online on various literary topics starting this Sunday. The first one is about Jane Austen, and the one the following Sunday is sort of the history of the mystery novel, which I think might any of them might interest some of you. Who knows? But if you'd like to learn more about that, Jesse, I think you've got a slide for this, don't you? But if you'd like to learn more about that, go to contextlearning.com. That's context, CONTEXT, learning.com. Next time, my guest is going to be, you guessed it, yet another New York Times bestselling author, Jacqueline Mitchard. You'll want to be here for that. But if for some reason you can't be, send me by email your questions in advance and I'll make sure they get asked. My email address is willbern@gmail.com. That's first four letters of both names, WILLBERN@gmail.com. Remember, if you subscribe to the William Bernhardt YouTube channel, you will be notified as soon as each one of these live streams begins. So subscribe. And of course, most importantly, keep writing. Stay healthy, stay safe. And remember, you cannot fail if you refuse to quit. See you next time.